Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 2023 Directors Close-Up Spirit Awards edition. I am Maria Raquel Bozzi, Senior Director of Education and International Initiatives at Film Independent. Before we start, we'd like to thank our generous sponsors for making this experience possible. The Directors Close-Up is supported by the Directors Guild of America, SAG-Indy, IMDb, and the Wallace Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts. Additional support has been provided by Film Independent Spirit Awards principal partner, IMDb, and official partners, Bullet Frontier Whiskey, Fiji Water, and Green Slate. We have gathered for today's session an incredible group of esteemed documentary directors who are this year's nominees for Best Documentary. Their work represents the wide array of the documentary form today. Exploring the lives of communities from India and Myanmar to the United States. Here with us are Snow, Hnin, and Hlaing. Snow.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Hello, Maria. Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I know it might be a little later than usual for all of us here. You're dialing in from Berlin, right?
Yes, right now I'm in Berlin, yes.
Yeah. Sierra Pettengill, from Director of Riotsville, U.S.A. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
And she's joining us from New York. Laura Poitras, the Director of All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Maria. It's great to be here.
So nice to have you. And Shaunak, the Director of All That Breathes.
Hello.
Great to see you. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, Simon Lereng Wilmont, the Director of A House Made of Splinters, joining us from Copenhagen, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Welcome and thank you for staying up late for us. And congratulations to all of you. And I really appreciate you sharing your beautiful work and insight with us today. Our moderator is a longtime friend of Film Independent, PJ Raval, and he's director of, amongst many other credits, call her Ganda. Welcome, PJ. Where are you?
I'm right here. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you. And we're going to have a great conversation. You take it away and enjoy.
Great. Thank you so much. First of all, I just want to say how excited I am to be in conversation with all of you. All of the films are amazing. Congratulations for being nominated. I can't wait to see what happens, right? But of course, it's an honor to be nominated. So I wanted to start off the conversation just kind of on a personal thread. And I think whether or not it's obvious to an audience, we as filmmakers clearly know the decision to make a film. It's a very personal choice, right? It's a commitment. So I'm wondering, I'm just going to throw this out there, whoever wants to start us off, but what was happening in your life at the moment you decided to commit to making this film? Like what influenced you and what compelled you to make this film?
Oh, can I start?
Sure. Go ahead, Snow.
Okay, yes. The reason why I started a midwife documentary is because of the Rohingya conflict happened in Myanmar in 2012. So that time, like two communities became killing each other. And so many of Rohingya, they had to flee to neighboring country, Bangladesh. And before that, they were neighbors and they were friends. And suddenly, people in the region, it was like everything was changed. It was horrible situation in Rakhine State, western part of Myanmar. Because my memory was like they were friends and everyone it was peaceful in the region, but suddenly it was not anymore. So because I was born in Rakhine State, so I had a lot of memories. So then suddenly change in this the state where I was born, and I was curious why all this happened in the state that where I was born. And because in Myanmar, we watched all the news on TV is owned by state media, is military. So everything what we learn, what we watch is like all fake news. So even we live in Myanmar, we don't know what's going inside our country, especially this Rohingya issue. That's what I want to interested to know about that. And then another reason is that because international media, everyone was saying about all the Rohingya refugee flee to Bangladesh. Like everyone thought like there was no more Rohingya in Rakhine State, which is not true. There are like 60,000 of Rohingyas still living together. So that's the information that I hear from my auntie. So I wanted to understand how can they coexist in that situation. So that was like a second question to me. And then another thing is that my auntie was telling me that Buddhist community, they are so scared of like Rohingya population is growing day by day. So because Muslim women, they don't take birth control, so babies are born every day. So when I hear that news information that okay, if there is baby born every day, there must be a midwife. So I started to think about like there should be midwives in that conflict region. So before I met two of my character, I started like kind of like developing imagination character, like there should be two midwives, one Buddhist midwife and one Rohingya Muslim midwife working together in the region. That was kind of I got that idea.
Great. So for you, the personal connection and maybe being the person, right, to tell the story of some of the questions that you have. I want to quickly go to Simon. I heard you laugh when I asked that question. So is there a story there?
There's lots of stories. I was kind of like going through all of it, the personal also, but I think I'm gonna keep those for myself. But no, the more professional actually ties up with the personal as well. A couple of years back, I was like in the final stages of shooting my previous film that was called The Disembarking of Dogs. It was also in Eastern Ukraine, and I'd followed, a very lovable couple, grandma taking care of her grandchild, and I got super close to that couple. They're amazing, and we became very good friends. But in the later stages of shooting that film, the grandma became very ill with heart conditions, and since she was the only guardian for taking care of the kid. I was starting to worry what would actually happen to the kid if she were to pass away, and to make a long story short, I kind of made a deal with my assistant Ukrainian director to kind of figure this out, so we would be prepared if the heart condition came back. Luckily, she survived and everything's going great, but we wanted to prepare. And that's what led us to the northern parts of the front line, because they invited us to show us what actually happens if a child is left without anybody to really take care of it.
Great, thank you. How about you, Laura? Were you looking to collaborate with another artist?
Yeah, for me, sometimes I'm pursuing films, and sometimes films they're more coincidence. And this one, Nan Golden, she started her protest against the Sackler families in 2018, before I was part of the project, and we just happened to have a breakfast. She invited me, and we were talking about another situation of toxic philanthropy in the art world, and she told me that she had shot all this footage of the protest, and I was so excited. I thought that was fantastic, and then she said she was looking for filmmakers to join. So then I couldn't stop thinking about it, because I was just really, I thought it was incredible that she was taking the risks to confront these institutions. And I also just want to say how great it is to be on a panel that's more international than it is U.S. So that's also really great.
Agreed. I love how you said it was something that you couldn't stop thinking about.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
That's often something that all filmmakers go with, right?
Yeah, totally. And I'm thinking about, like, I love how Snow described it. Like she said, there must be midwives, that kind of almost a detective, like such a smart question, and then to find the story that way. And I think sometimes as filmmakers, we're like drawn to a theme, but we don't know how to tell it and the way in. And then sometimes things maybe come a bit more to us.
So oh, sorry, go ahead, Sierra.
I was going to say that's a good jumping off point for me, because this idea of something kind of arriving and then having to figure it out, that's what happened with me in Riotsville. I work as a archival researcher, and I'm pretty obsessive in that task. And I stumbled across some footage that was by no means, inaccessible to the public, but hadn't been widely seen. And that was the footage that's sort of at the heart of the film. And it felt like a puzzle, figuring out what this was and what to do with it. And, the film took me 7 years. So my personal relationship to that, even trying to understand, that was different through different years of time. But it did really feel like I had an obligation to this material to put it in the right context, and the process of making the film was figuring out what that context was, and what it had to say about, all the various ways we were living through a kind of repeated history in the 7 years it took.
I mean, thinking about that idea of the process of making the film, now that you have the idea, maybe you have some of the footage, right? Or access to an archive, an idea. I'm curious if all of you could share with us just how do you, for lack of a better description, maybe strategize, right? Like, how do you determine what is the best way to tell this story or to capture this moment, or Snow, for you to answer the question, right, that you might have? Like, how do you create that vehicle that's going to be the film? What are some of your first thoughts on how to approach it?
Yes.
Sean. Oh, go ahead, Snow.
Sorry, please.
No, go ahead, please, Snow.
Oh, so for me, because Myanmar country political situation is very complex. So I can't explain, nobody cannot explain what is going on because so complex. But to explain, to understand about this, the whole conflict, it should start with something very little story. That would be so kind of okay, we started to introduce someone and hear from their experience is more way to approach and to understand about the bigger picture of this conflict situation. Also, because when we think about conflict, we always see the image of soldiers and weapons and guns and everything. If we look at the conflict, so that was kind of the first images coming to everyone. But in a conflict region, there are so many of children and women living, and they get through their life, every day of life. So as a woman filmmaker, for me I want to understand more about women perspective, how women going through their life in their conflict region. So that's how I approach this women characters, also who are also midwives who live in the region. But also one thing that, because some people might think okay, women in the conflict region and children living in the region, they are suffer. Of course, they do suffer. They do have a lot of horrible situation they are facing every day, but they don't cry every day. So maybe they cry for 2 or 3 days, then they back up and they continue their life. So I wanted to have this kind of strong personality character. They are everywhere. It's not only in Myanmar, also everywhere in the whole world. There are so many conflicts, but so many women living and they stand up for their life. And so that's how I started the project with from women perspective.
How about you, Shaunak? The idea of how to tell this story. I mean, obviously your film is so visually stunning. Was that a priority of yours in the very beginning? The way that I'm going to tell this story is also going to really privilege the cinematic nature and quality of this moment and of this story.
I think it was most definitely form over content initially. It's odd, it's like a film, I think, first begins like a kind of glow at the back of your head, and how it, at least for me, at any rate, starts as it's a texture or a tone. It's a tone of pace, and it's a tone of editing cadence and vaguely camera movements before I get a sense of the theme, especially in this film, And with me, it began with a kind of preoccupation with the air in Delhi. If you live in Delhi, you can't really escape the pervasive grayness that just laminates every aspect of your life, right? So I wanted to do something that communicated grayness or a kind of texture of the monochromatic sky that you see often in the winters in Delhi. I was also philosophically interested in human non-human relationships. So the first thing that I wrote in my diary is that I wanted to do like an abstract triangulation of air, birds, humans. And then it's like, so it was that vague and woo-woo and, abstract. And I wasn't even sure if I want, like, nothing was clear to me. And that's good because then it's a kind of radical openness to everything. And the only thing I knew was that that it would be good at some point to be able to use tracks and dollies. Literally, that's so. I know it sounds a bit reductive and functional, but it will be so nice to do something that is meditative and contemplative, and therefore in its form cinematic and like it's aesthetic, and that's actually how the film started. And then it's afterwards, when you meet the characters and you meet the singular and remarkable work that the two brothers Nadeem and Saud do, and the house that they live in and all of that, that has an irreducible specificity that impels the story forward. But the bulwark or the ideas that are underwriting it is the question of tone and pace and rhythm. And I think that's what I was most excited by. That's what kept me going, and that's how it started. And I think that even with the last film, that's what I had made a film on sleeping before this, and even then I was interested in how one thinks of rhythms when it comes to sleeping.
Great. How about you, Sierra? I mean, you're working with archival material, so it's all there in front of you already. How do you start approaching that? Do you do a big writing retreat? Do you how do you really dive in and figure out how are you going to tell this story?
I wish I had a simple answer for you, so then the process would be easier. It wasn't all right in front of me. I think if you've seen the film, the Riotsville footage itself is such a jarring, shocking, sort of otherworldly piece of material. And I really went back and forth about all the way to the end, really, about what it meant to make another film about 1968, add to that pile. And it was from the beginning very important to me that all the footage and the perspective in the film was fresh, was material that largely hadn't been seen, or if it, had been seen. And again, I'm not precious about I don't really believe in the idea of uncovering unseen archive. All the material that's in the film for me was very deliberately had already been broadcast on television or was authored by the military. It's a public history that's been forgotten rather than one that's been hidden, and the heroics of that. So that was a kind of early guiding principle, is that all this material needs to be feel like a different perspective, and also for a film that is very centered in the violence that the state and its sort of associated enterprises like the media and private corporations. There's so much violence inherent in that material that I made a very early decision as well not to show any footage of people being physically harmed outside of these recreations until we arrive at some footage at the very end that sort of shakes that formal constraint up a bit. But
Sierra, I was wondering, because I've seen your film, I don't know if everybody has described the footage that the recreation.
Oh yeah, sorry. And it's hard when you've been so inside something. It is the title Riotsville, U.S.A. comes from a series of mock cities that the government and the military together built on military bases after the uprisings of 1967 to train cops, primarily from all over the country, in putting down protests and civil disobedience. And so soldiers dress like protesters, Black Panthers, hippies, and then other soldiers, and they build these fake sets and they, reenact fictionalized uprisings. And so the film takes kind of two paths. One is figuring out what that material what actually was happening, what government program this was part of, how it came to be, what policies birthed it, and then also a larger, more meditative reckoning with what the ongoing war against Black communities in the United States, what it means, how it's sustained, and what this footage can tell us about that. Did I get it, Laura?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, that's the foot. Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible footage. That's why it's extraordinary. That the U.S. is creating these fake protests so that they can, how to suppress dissent.
Yeah, it's deeply chilling, and it, for me, it serves both as like a metaphor and a physical space.
And when you see the footage, it's jaw-dropping, right? Like, and I love what you said about it's not hidden, it's forgotten, right? And it took you to kind of put it out there and put it in the forefront for us to understand it, right?
Yeah.
And see it.
And the film is really only archival footage with on-screen text and some narration written by the incredible critic Toby Haslett. But I did a lot of other things. I interviewed about 35 soldiers who participated. Those interviews didn't make it into the film. I shot a recreation at some point, which also didn't make it into the film. So I really was very open. There's a lot of like digital manipulation of the archival footage that's in the film. I really, I was very open formally to just trying to make sure I was getting to the heart of this in the right way.
Great. I want to stick on that thread for a second, just kind of like the formal aspect, right, in the experimentation. Shaunak, you spoke about the visual, the visual style of going into that. I'm curious, Laura, Simon, Snow, if any of you want to comment upon just the artistic choices in the making of your films, and if there were any guiding principles in terms of like a visual storytelling or some kind of, creative rule book for you. Laura, maybe you could share a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was some of the echoing some of what other people have said is the things I didn't want it to be. I did not want to make a traditional artist biopic. That made me really nervous. I didn't want to I wanted to make a film that stood as a film and that had certain themes, and it was going to be a portrait, not a bio. And I didn't want to be individualizing. To go back to your previous question, I tend to follow something happening in real time. There's a lot at stake, and it's usually an individual or group of individuals confronting power that relates to U.S. government. And I wanted them to be larger reflections on larger critiques and not reductive, not reductive to the individual. Particularly when you're dealing with something like, in this case, addiction, drugs, overdose, the overdose crisis. I didn't want it to be just about the individual, and then had to make it larger. I mean, this actually relates to Sierra because we have the antagonist. The antagonist is the Sackler family, who've been very good at staying off of, any kind of finding media to pull from. And Sierra, we actually hired for at the beginning of the project, what can you find on the Sackler families? And the answer is very little or nothing.
It was so hard. And so, yeah, it felt like such a failure to do my job there,
and Sierra is the master of archival. And so we sort of knew that we had a bit of an invisible antagonist, but, they weren't the hardest to represent. And then luckily, at the end of the film, they were required by their bankruptcy judge in order to get their sweetheart immunity deal. They were compelled to witness victim testimony. They were compelled to do that so that they could get 25 pages, single-spaced immunity for all their, private companies, lawyers, accountants, etc. So they were forced to listen. So we did get that moment, which was important for us. I mean, we could have finished the film without it, but it meant a lot to see their faces. But yeah, it was. I mean, kind of what Snow is saying. Like it's about like an individual, but hopefully it sheds light on something larger.
And that moment that you're describing is an amazing moment in the film, right? Because it almost becomes this portrait of all of them, right?
Yeah.
Like, those who are unseen are being seen, right? And we're waiting to see their reaction, and we're waiting to see, if they're going to have any humanity, come forward.
And you don't see much.
Can I ask you a question, Laura? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, go ahead, Sean.
So often in a lot of films that have to do with activism as a theme, it tends to become sometimes a bit moralistic or pedantic, or where you're
Or
lecturing
repetitive.
or lecturing the audience in terms of, and so often you just want to say that it's not always that good politics makes good art, right? It's not a straight correlation, and pamphleteering films often don't work. Yet in your film, it feels like a genuinely soulful exploration of what it means to be creative, whilst also having a sharp gaze on the structural logic of everything that's going on. So how did you, like, during the edit, did you have points where you thought, this is becoming too much of pamphleteering, and now, like, did you struggle with that at all?
I mean, the challenge was the repetitive, and as you're saying, I mean, I've myself filmed people protesting, and I've worked as given advice or feedback or supported other films, and there is this kind of inherent limitation to the footage, so it needed to be bolstered by other material. And so this is obviously, as we all know, this is a collective art form that we do, and we have great editors. We've all worked with great editors. Amy Foote, who is really masterful at verite footage, and we were just like, we can't repeat things. So I think it was a combination of making sure we had behind the scenes. I don't know if you've seen How to Survive a Plague, which is about the AIDS crisis, where you really see like the internal conflicts within organizers and their sort of class and racial conflicts. So you sort of get a bit more of the blueprint, that it doesn't just happen, right? So there's a bit more of a behind the scenes. That was a piece of it. But then, I think for me, it was how to go back to core principles. Like, it's a film, like, why do we make art? Like, Nan makes art as to have a voice and to reject denialism, to say like, no, I'm going to talk about the truth. And so just, if that felt like it was being motivated from some really deep, pure place, then there would be a continuity between, different moments in her life. I mean, for me, the line where she describes early in the film that her mother says, after learning of the tragic suicide of her sister, like, tell the children it was an accident, and everything is, for me, it's like, okay, that's the rejection of that idea. No, it's not an accident, and to tell the truth, and so that was kind of the core.
Right. Can we talk about trust for a moment? Thinking specifically about yours, Laura, as an example, like gaining the trust of someone like Nan Goldin, who very clearly is a visible figure and is a storyteller in their own right? Or Simon, thinking about trusting yourself, right, to share the stories of these young, vulnerable kids, right? So I just want to throw it out there, just the role of trust in filmmaking, trusting yourself, earning the trust. And maybe we can start with Laura, because I am curious about working with Nan Goldin.
Yeah. It was really important early on. I mean, she was a collaborator. She's a producer on the film. She started the film, and so much of the material is based on her artwork. So, and she talks in the film, which is, I think, a really powerful, when she talks about how she takes photographs and the agency of the people that she documents, that they have, that she tries to give them the right to tear something up, or the right to not have something shown, and so we built some guidelines like that. I mean, I'm the director of the film, like, I had the final cut, but if there was something that was too personal for her, she was going to have the opportunity to say that that's not something I need to share with the general public. And in the end, I think, once we showed her the film, she wanted to go deeper into different things. It wasn't like pulling back. But yeah, I mean, and we had to get it right. It's Nan's artwork, so and she's talking about her personal experiences, so I wanted them to be truthful to her.
Earning her trust and having you trust her that she's trusting you, right? To tell that story. And
yeah, and building safety. I mean, building safety nets too, particularly when you're talking about really difficult experiences.
How about you, Simon? What was the role of trust in your film?
I think that's probably the most important part of my project. I don't know how I could have lived with myself if people weren't the participant weren't okay to be in this film, it would be devastating. And it's been a question I've also struggled a lot with, especially in the early stages of filming the film. Was it even okay to do this? You know, the kids kind of quickly grew into it and allowed me to be there in the more emotional, raw scenes. But for me, I struggled quite a bit whether or not it was morally okay. So it was very important for me, first of all, to get a close collaboration with their caregivers, the ones that had the huge, many years of experience and knew, you know, the boundaries and where to go and where not to go, and how to listen and how to get everything right. But more importantly, also, you know, to make sure that the children understood that even though, you know, I'm a filmmaker from afar, this is not to please me. And if there's anything that they didn't want me to film, they should just, you know, put up their hand or say stop or just simply walk away. And obviously I would do that. And in those cases where that actually happened, it's so important for me as a human being, both morally, but also to gain their trust, you know, to put down the camera and respect that situation, which I did. And I think that fosters a lot of mutual trust. So that at some point, you know, we grew really close, I think. And then I think it's also a matter for me of not being too greedy as a professional. By that, I mean, you know, I'm also a documentary filmmaker, so I know, you know, when those golden minutes are just like flowing in through the camera, and that can be very addictive, you know, but I was because I came so close to the kids, I was very careful the second I felt that I had a scene to lay down the camera, instead of just making sure, like, or triple sure or even more sure that I got the scene. Instead of doing that, just the second that I kind of felt, okay, I might have enough to cover this, okay, I lay down the camera, and then I'm there for the kids if they want a shoulder to cry on, or if they just want to, you know, take a walk in silence or talk or whatever they want, you know. Yeah, because without that, I would feel like a horrible person, I think, especially in this film, above any of the other films I've made.
I mean, I love...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, just real quick. I mean, I love what you're also mentioning here is this concept of trust is also thinking about accountability and care, right? Like care for your protagonists, accountability to yourself and to them, right? In terms of the way that you're handling things. Sierra, you had a thought?
Yeah, no, I have a lot of questions, mostly because this isn't a kind of filmmaking I do, and I relish the opportunity to sort of ask, like, it sounds like when you just said, you know, giving them the opportunity to put their hand up or stop or walk away, to me, it would feel like really gratifying the first time a subject did that, to know that you know, like if everyone's just kind of going along with it, how do you know that there are actual boundaries? And then I'm just curious, like, what, I'm sure it changes over the years, but what your relationships are like with your subjects after the filming is done, after the film comes out, you know, is there like a long-term plan for, you know, I'd imagine maybe the relationships to the film change over time as well.
That's a super good question. In the case of the last two films I've made, which are both feature-length films from the Eastern Front in Ukraine, contrary to the others where, yeah, we had a relationship, or, you know, we knew each other, and it fizzles out over time. But in this case, it's been hard to let it go. That's a strange formulation, because I feel like they're friends also. So we chat online, and in regards to the kids, you know, I've kept tabs on them. I think the whole Ukrainian team, as very quickly into this project, we knew that this is not just a film. You know, we got to do something. We got to try. We're not stupid, so we know we can't change the world. but we wanted to try to change something, at least for these kids. I think maybe 45 or something that was there at the Margarita's shelter where we were filming. And so we set up a private initiative to make sure that these kids had somebody to reach out to, a professional psychologist with children's traumas as a specialty, that they could reach out to if they wanted to talk, not as something they had to do, but if they needed to talk to somebody, there would always be something there. And that partly, gave me the opportunity to stay in touch with the kids, but also it gave us a really good sense of how successful that was. It was actually being used quite a lot until the 24th of February came like a bowling ball into a set of pins and knocked everything off for maybe 9 months or something. But we're starting to establish that again, and we're going to run that project as long as possible, because these kids actually, they've touched us. It's more than just a story for me. But truth be told, like in my former projects, I also really care for the subjects, but in time that fizzles out, I think. But in these last two films, it's grown into something different.
I mean, it's a really interesting place to be as a filmmaker, right? Because in a lot of ways, we're experiencing some of the most vulnerable, life-changing moments, and we're behind the camera, but we're there too, right? Experiencing it ourselves. Snow, I'm wondering if you can comment upon that as someone who's also filming in an area of conflict, thinking also just about basic safety, right, of your protagonists, and thinking about the trust and safety and care that's kind of involved with that. If you have anything you want to share with us about that.
Yes. So the situation was conflicts happened in Rakhine State, but I live in another state in Yangon. So I have this two midwives character that is just like, I just have this idea, but I don't know two of my character. So I went to Rakhine State and searched for these two characters, because like it was kind of like a black box for me, like even though, because I don't know them. So I was traveling different villages with my auntie who live in that region until now. So we were traveling together to search for my dream character. So it took like five days, and then after this 5 days, and I met two of my character, and Hlaing and Yu, they work together in the same clinic and the same village. They live together. So when they see me, they thought I'm a journalist. So because sometimes like journalists show up and then they interview some people, not to Hlaing and Yu, but for other people, they saw it on social media. So they were scared. They don't want their story come out like a short news clip on a social media. So they're so scared of like journalists coming to make out of the story. But I told them I'm not a journalist. I'm a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker. But in Myanmar, who will know what is documentary? But very little, like only, very little group of people aware of like documentary filmmaking. So for me, building trust between me and two of my character, it was quite challenging because they don't know what is the documentary. Because I told them, documentary is like, I follow your story for many years, and then I want to observe what is happening in the region and how they've been helping for Rohingya women and Rohingya community with the healthcare in the region. So they were kind of like, they don't really understand. But then also in the beginning, they don't really know what's going on, but they kind of like, they want to be collaborate with me. And because I told them, they are such an amazing women because in that area, there is no healthcare. So they are like rural doctors helping and like treating so many patients. So that was kind of like, I had to build the trust between two of my characters. It took like 3 or 4 months because they were kind of like, I told them I will come back several times so that you will trust me. You understand what am I going. So the more I returned back to several times to Rakhine State. It took like several times. It took 5 years to make this story. So when I start this story, it's just only about this coexistence. But then it's not only about coexistence anymore. So as you can see, the character, they grow, and Yu was my character. She was kind of apprentice, and she became a mother, and suddenly she got pregnant, and then when I started this, I just want to know about this religious, like Rohingya conflict in the region. But then after 2 years, they were not, the conflict is not about Rohingya conflict anymore. That chapter is done. Then another chapter is about civil war happened in the region. So also like when I started this project is like, there was that period of time, 2016, military, they don't allow any journalist and filmmaker come into the region. So I was kind of like, I had to be low profile, pretty much. Like I don't talk to anyone, because also if someone's suspicious and they were informed military, I would get arrested. Also on the way to village, there are military checkpoint. So I had to hide camera underneath seat of driver seat. Because I make only friends with a tuk-tuk driver who was helping me all the time, because I only hire him. So he knows that what am I doing. I told them, please don't tell anyone. But then the more I go back, he understands what I've been filming in the clinic. So every time we travel to the village, we had to also practice which village we are going every day. So if I repeat like the same village every day, we will get suspicious and we will get arrested. So all the gear was always hidden, and the first 2 years was alone in like going to shoot in a clinic. But then civil war happened in the region. So that was not only about Rohingya conflict anymore. That time, everyone is like also Rakhine community and two community, they were in danger, also including me. So we are kind of like, we become very close. Me and two of my character and me, we are protecting each other. Somehow like the trust building is so important, and also the safety of this film is like a lot of challenges for me. So now the situation is not only about civil war in the region, is about military in the whole war, the whole country of Myanmar. So everyone is in danger. So after making this film, I cannot go back home. So my security is like no more, you know, I just trying to understand Rohingya conflict, and another layer appear chapter of another conflict, and then the whole picture is the whole country is in horrible situation since the military coup. It's all been almost already 2 years now. So there is no safety now. I cannot go back, and if I go back, I will get arrested. I think probably they already know that this film is kind of spread out, because also one thing that in the news in the media about Myanmar is kind of forgotten. So it's very rare to see a Myanmar news, but somehow when this film started, like this film kind of like introducing to international medias and international audience that what is happening in Myanmar. So it's very sad to witness that Myanmar news is very and like kind of like forgotten in the whole world, because we have a suffer, and people are fighting against military every day. So many people had to fight, but that news is not coming out. But somehow this midwife story kind of like engaging to international audience. Yeah.
Well, Snow, you made a beautiful and an impactful film, and it's a real it's a real tragedy that you can't go back because of personal safety. But I do want to say that your film is making a huge impact, right, on the world, and not to say that you're sacrificing a certain amount, but as filmmakers, maybe that's some of the risk that we take, right, in terms of telling this story. I want to remind audiences we're opening it up to Q&A, and I'm going to get to it in a second, but I do want to ask one last question since we're on this right now, is the idea of risk and the concept of risk here, and what do you risk in terms of making the film, whether that be risking failure, whether that be risking maybe the subject's safety, maybe you risk shooting 400 hours of footage, and in the edit, you feel like you still don't have the film. So I'm wondering if we could just talk about risk really quick, and maybe Shaunak, we could start with you, and Sierra, since we haven't heard from you in a while.
Well, I think risk can be divided into three aspects. There are of course, the emotional risks of opening up your life, that the characters have. Yeah. And connected to those are your emotional risks of 300 hours of footage and then not having a film. And it really is very demanding and lonely and, sometimes cripplingly paralyzing and so on. The second are the political risks of the characters. And of course, there it's a question of constant conversation and consent, and what is okay to do in year one might not be okay to do in year three. Certain doors might open up in year three, which are completely different, and so on. So one has to be completely, like open up to, one has to be open to the multiple eventualities that might open up eventually. And thirdly, there's also the risks of betrayal with the character, in the deepest sense of the word, where you can betray characters and characters can betray you without either of those parties being malicious or wanting to do anything wrong. And that becomes a very complicated sort of, betray might be too heavy because, the film takes on a kind of life of its own, and it becomes a beast, and it becomes so much bigger than anything that you had imagined when you started. And it reaches points where, it takes on a kind of shape that is, at least from the world that I come from, I can't wrap my head around how big this space is. And both in the positives, like I was joking with Laura the other day saying, like, how are we in a room? How am I in a room with, Tom Cruise and Spielberg and all of that? But also at the same time, the risks, the fact that something you did can affect lives really, really matters. So there's no easy, clean answer to it. And it's almost like listening to having your ear to the ground every single day. But just to add to the previous question of trust, there's also the question of trust aesthetically. The authentic aesthetic appeals of trust in a film. And for me, it's often, when you beginning with my characters, initially they were very used to being interviewed in talking heads, and the ambition of the verite form is to have a kind of quotidian, everyday, mundane, banal form where characters are being instead of behaving in front of the camera, right? And that's very difficult to get. And for me, how one arrives at it always is boredom. You have to arrive at a critical mass of boredom where they're aware of you, but they're unself-conscious enough to not care. And it's like, if you have the first yawn, it's usually fine. Because usually you become a kind of wallpaper to their lives, and that's the point where the question of risk and trust, etc., becomes, that's when ethical compunctions around it become most pregnant, because you see, that's when full trust has come in, and then it's a matter of what you do with it. And also it's like sometimes characters might want things in their lives to change in a way that the film can't give them. It's as simple as that, right? So you also have to have a hard conversation on, it's a fine dance between editorial autonomy, but also being real and telling characters that at some points there might be the poorer angels of their nature that want them to ask something of the film that the film cannot give you. So it's this kind of a nuanced sort of and it's very important to not render either the filmmaker sacrosanct nor the character sacrosanct, So anyway, that's my take on it.
Great. Audiences, I promise I will get to your questions, but Laura, I want to give you an opportunity to respond. I saw you nodding your head.
I wanted to hit Simon too. I just wanted to echo, I agree with everything that Shaunak just said. And, there is a risk towards you when you say there's a risk of storytelling, right? There's a risk when you elevate a story that you're sort of doing this thing, individualizing against, and, we're oftentimes interested in larger social questions, and then by selecting some people, and we sort of maybe lose the scale of an issue. And for me, like the risk, it's important for me that the risks that are being taken were taken before I got involved. To me, that's important.
Sierra, could you
All right.
comment really quickly?
Yeah,
Because I
yeah.
think, you have a very specific risk also. I mean, you're telling a history that has been, I think you said not hidden, but forgotten, right? What is the risk that you have there in terms of becoming now the historian?
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I think I have what feels, I guess I would term it less of a risk and more as a real heavy weight and responsibility to do justice to people who have been deeply harmed, and make sure that if I'm making a film that does get elevated, as we're talking about, to being part of a conversation, that what I'm contributing is reflective deeply and closely of the very high stakes politics it's meant to be addressing. And I guess it did feel like a risky film to make. It took a really long time to get money for it. I felt like the politics, this is a film about abolition. It's a film that's calling for the defunding of the police in the United States. And I think it's a little more radical than a lot of funders are totally up for. And the form, I think the film is actually incredibly accessible. And I think that it was not, there's a politics to the formal choices I'm making too, to make sure I'm contextualizing material and not letting a kind of mainstream media lens become a default storytelling. And so the form that I chose felt very politically important and careful to get right. But I felt like I was in the making of it and the fundraising, I was constantly pushing the edge of what was okay. And, there's a lot of pressure to make money back. And, there's a lot of stakeholders when something takes a long time and costs a lot of money. And there's always a voice telling you that you have a responsibility to an industry or a funder or the risks of getting the story wrong and watering down the political import felt way higher to me than watering down the film and taking a less risky path in a sort of industry way. Those felt like the risks I was trying to balance.
Great. I would love to continue this thought, and maybe we can return to it, but let's take a couple audience questions really quick, and we can just popcorn these. Whoever wants to respond to them, feel free to jump out. The first question we have is, how do you know when it's time to stop shooting? And maybe I'll even add to that, or editing, right? Is it the premiere? Is it you run out of money? Is it you have to get out of the country? Simon, do you want to start?
Yeah, I kind of felt like, at least in the last two projects, that at some point in time, my curiosity was kind of sated. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't think of any new stuff to film. And I started wanting to hang out more with the main characters than I really wanted to pick up the camera. And at that point in time, that's when I call it quits, and then, may the dice fall where they may, It's not that I have that I know I have a full film at that point in time. It's just, the curiosity is over, or and it's I don't know how to say it.
How about you, Snow? As someone who's following over a significant amount of time, how do you know it's time to stop filming?
All the time I had to stop because of the military coup happened in Myanmar. So that was very unexpected situation that we all been facing, not only me and the whole country. But anyway, I wanted to go back to the character, Nuno, when she built the clinic. So she started with the clinic, and that was conflict happened. So I had to leave the region, and then COVID hit the whole country. So I couldn't go back to Rakhine State for 1 year. And then suddenly out of blown, the military coup happened. in the whole country, and I was protest for three months. Then after 3 months, things are getting worse. Then I was realized, okay, if I'm not going back to Rakhine State right now, I can never go back to make this finishing this film. Also, so many people were asking me, when is your ending, like final shoot to be in Rakhine State? So I had to take the flight, and luckily that time it was only one flight that's going to Rakhine State, because it had like they had ceased fire between cease agreement between two army. I don't know why they have this kind of like agreement. Then it was lucky for me that I have chance to go to film for final shoot for 2 weeks. So after 2 weeks, I came back and I packed all my things. Like, of course, like I had to prepare everything. I know that it's something, it will be dangerous for everyone. So I was like 1 month, I prepared everything, and I left Myanmar 2021 in June. Then I fly to Thailand, the neighboring country. So actually the editing start in Thailand. So the idea was the edit will be in Canada, because I have a Canadian producer, Mila Antwin and Bob. And so the edit will be, it should be there, but then I couldn't go anywhere, like because of the COVID, and I cannot apply visa. Somehow, so Mila came to Thailand and we started edit. So in everywhere, because I couldn't, it was for 4 months in Thailand and then another month in Germany to finish like a lot of things. It was so much chaos because the plan was something, and then something just happened out of nowhere because of the situation in Myanmar. So yeah. So everything was uncertain since 2021 somehow. I can make plan, and something just happened, and yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else want to jump in about how do you know when you're done?
For me, there's no clear line at all, because I've now figured that I have to edit and shoot together. So when I know that I'm on the final act of the shooting, like the final stages of shooting, because the mountain of the 300 hours of footage otherwise becomes insurmountable, so I start editing, and then you keep figuring out gaps and start shooting it. So there's no clear division between editing and shooting at all.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask something? So you also edit between shoots, Shaunak?
Yeah, so the thing is, as you know, we finally edited the film in Copenhagen next to your edit room, and the thing there is that, so there was of course a very natural kind of a boundary, because the production money was going to get over, and we had booked our editor Charlotte's time in Copenhagen. So, and Copenhagen is super expensive, so we had to go. So there was a kind of a natural closing off point. But apart from that, yes, for about the final 5 months of shooting in India, we had basically an editor, somebody called Vedant, who was sitting and trim. So my aim was to go to Copenhagen with a 3-hour cut, and then for the next 6 months there, just to chisel and scalpel away to find rhythm, basically. But yes, otherwise, the more iterations you get, the better. So I prefer landing at the editor's doorstep with something that has my articulation in it, instead of it being just a completely open book.
Great. I'm going to jump around some of the questions here just to see if we can cover some things. We kind of started talking about this already, maybe Sierra, but a question from an anonymous: what challenges do you face with financing when making documentaries that question social norms and can be seen as controversial, and controversial in quotes?
Do you want me to?
Oh, sorry.
No, sure, you could start.
I feel like I've already, I've given my preview.
Just challenges galore. It's like, especially because, when you're in the global south, very often you're not getting funding from your country's funds. So you're applying to international grants, which means that the competitive pool, and I'm certain it's probably the same case with Snow as well, that you're applying for really competitive international grants, and to fight it out for Sundance or IDFA or Catapult or Tribeca, etc. It's not easy, and you really have to dial up in terms of the caliber very early on. And then to be able to convince people, like I was very fortunate to have Rise Films in the UK and Tanglebank in the US, but so you're basically a pitching machine, and
Exactly.
you're in the beginning, you're a grant writing machine. You're not a filmmaker. You're a professional
Yes.
filmmaker. And
Yes.
then after that, you become a pitching machine, and you go through all the pitches, and you have a 3-minute version ready, a 10-minute version ready, you have a 4-minute pitch ready, you have all of that ready, a lot of which doesn't even coincide with what you want to actually make, but what you want to essentially have the Western world here. So there is definitely some equivocation and deception involved, because so much of and you can't blame them, because they're saying you have to say things that they think their audiences will like. And how do you find that kind of a sweet spot? And it's impossible to communicate that at an early nascent stage. Once the film is ready, if the film is good, then it could be very particular, but it'll still open up to the universal, but in the pitching stage, it's impossible. So for me, it was in the first year a ton of overstating and equivocation and prevarication and all of that.
I'm just going
Yeah.
to expand upon this a little bit, but say, all the films here clearly are amazing films that filmmakers in the future will probably be referencing, right? Like, oh, this is one of my influences, right? But to go along this question, clearly there is pressure from the industry to make something more commercially accessible, right? This idea of trying to make it agreeable with everyone, whatever these industry pressures are. So I'm wondering if we could expand this question in terms of how do you navigate those industry pressures, maintain your artistic vision, maybe risk some funding in the process, who knows? But let's just talk about that, your interaction with the industry and the industry's pressures placed upon you while you're making this film. If anybody wants to jump in. Yeah, Simon.
The thing is, like, my second film, the recent one, A House Made of Splinters, I actually thought, after the first one, that it taking place, in a war zone was actually a selling point at the commissioning editors. And I kind of went with that, even though that wasn't the selling point for me at all. It was about human connection and how we grasp for each other in times of need, But what surprised me the most, and that's also really, like, for me, a lesson to people, aspiring filmmakers, that what you think is a selling point in your film might not be your strongest selling point. It's actually about listening to what the commissioning editors are actually saying, because what I soon realized while we were out into the world, they were super interested in the film, but it wasn't because it was taking place in Eastern Ukraine at all. It was because it was a film about kids with alcoholic parents and the letdowns that they're facing and how they cope, because this is like a universal issue. And that's why, commissioning editors from Europe, various places, wanted to buy into the film. So it's about listening to what the feedback that they also give you, because there can be really good, strong points in that as well.
How about you, Laura? How do you navigate the commissioning editor?
It's a good question. I mean, it changes over time. I mean, the first feature that I finished in 2003. So it's called Flag Wars. It was a different landscape. And so then the next 3 films I made were all funded by public television, and they were all they took some risks on the work, particularly this film I did called The Oath, which was partly set in Guantanamo Bay Prison, partly set in Yemen, dealing with Al-Qaeda. And I thought no one was going to fund it. And we did get grants. And it was sort of at a time when maybe the mainstream media wasn't asking questions. And I felt that the commissioning pools, there was a desire to have different perspectives. I mean, and now we're in a different landscape. I mean, let's face it. We know there are some more resources. This is good. People, are be able to work, and that's a good thing. But then there are different pressures. But I don't want to make any enemies right now. So.
Life lessons right here, right?
Yeah. So thank you, Sean, for saying about this pitch machine. So for me, it's not even start from international. It start with Southeast Asia pitching competition. So to come to international world, I had to pass a lot of exam. And also for me, I'm from Myanmar, and nobody know that there was no examiner of someone who make a documentary. Also, the political situation is so complex, and then I'm also women. And then the first pitch was like, oh, we are thank you for trying to make this film, and the political situation is so complex, and you are also women. Is it? And we are very concerned about your safety. Would that be? Is that okay or not? Because they were not talking about the story anymore, not even saying that, because they just like it would not be possible. So I was like, how can I show them it would be possible? And then I could make it possible as a woman. So they were finding out, oh, women, is that okay to be in that area? Of course, I want to. Otherwise, how can I bring this film to show that I'm a filmmaker? Because this is the only one thing that I could prove that I'm a filmmaker, that I can make this kind of documentation. So the first two, after 2 or 3, then they kind of like understand about not only about the political situation, because my story is more about women in midwives. So the more I go back, and the story kind of like developed every time when I pitch in a different country, and then the same people, they all come back. So then they realize, oh yes, you can do this. So I had to prove, and yes, I can make this. Yes, here I come back with this development. So a lot of like pitching machine, and a lot of so many exam and people, industry meeting, and it was very good experience. I enjoyed it a lot, because sometimes we make a documentary, but now we finish it. But I really enjoy the whole process. So that process makes me really happy. Like the process is really important, and parallel we are searching for fundings, and we're trying to get a funding from different country. Same time, we are going into the location place and to read the story and then come back. And so these two things is working parallel, and the process is working parallel. Yeah,
I mean, it's also relationship building, right?
Relationship building.
Yeah, it's relationship building too. Go ahead, Laura.
I want to just add, like, listening to the stories about pitching, the importance, and this is probably a panel subject for a different panel, the importance of the people who are looking at the funds, that they represent different parts of the world, and that they also represent people who make things, because this process, early on in the process, you don't have all the answers, and this sort of expectation, and that we need to also be asking that the people who are sitting on the panels are have broad experience.
Yeah.
Just one last thing, and this is kind of a very practical thing, which took me quite some years to discover, and it's maybe not the most hopeful thing, but what I think is almost also very important to know as an aspiring filmmaker is that when you meet those commissioning editors, you're coming there with your your creative child or your passion, but it's actually a business situation. And for these commissioning editors, they can only support a certain, amount of projects every year. So they're going to wait until the very last to give you any sort of LOI or LOC or something, because they want to be assured that they will get something for their money as possible. So even though they might not seem like super interested, just remember, that if you feel that you're really bringing them something, it's probably because you are, and it's a business situation. So if they're not overly enthusiastic, it's maybe to make you bring more or to have you coming back. So you also have some power in going different places and exploring different avenues of how to get it out there.
That is a great transition to this next question, which I'm going to add to as well. But the question is, how do you take care of yourself as you're immersed in these very emotional stories doing work and keeping schedules that at time can be grueling. But I want to also expand it to, how do you also, like, do you have what is your North Star? Like, how do you keep focused throughout this whole project, despite how challenging it can be, right? Despite having to maybe pitch 100 times and not getting the funds that you really desperately need. Like, how do you keep that hope going? How do you take care of yourself, right? Making the film.
I'll just, since I am, I think the least physically at risk, I mean, I'm just, Snow, I'm totally in awe of what you've done and how you've done it. For me, collaboration is kind of the most crucial part of filmmaking. And I, particularly on this film, found myself working with some of the artists I respect the most in their various fields, from the composer to the editor to the writer, and my producers, who are also filmmakers on their, directors themselves. And to keep, I did want to quit a lot of times, and letting down those people who were bars that I was trying to reach. I was trying to reach their level of artistry all the time, and kind of rise to the level of the people I was working with. And that, for me, that was the most important kind of driver.
Anyone else want to add?
For me, it's.
And therapy.
I'm sorry. I think Sierra is super right. No, it's about the people you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with good people, they're gonna help you, and I think that's probably one of the most enjoyable parts of filmmaking, that it's a collaborative process, and you get to meet some incredible people. And if they're not incredible, you shouldn't work with them. That's kind of like my take on it.
Anyone else?
Also taking on from the previous question and adding it to this one, I did not feel any pressure, because I did not know what the world was. It was like all of this was just so unfathomably far from everything that it's all I could do. And I wasn't working on multiple projects. I deep dived feverishly into this one project, which took 3 years, and there was no other alternative. So it had to work, and then you have to move worlds for it to work. And so I was feeling no pressure at all, because I didn't know of how rich and dense the nonfiction world is. Now I feel like with the next film, maybe I will feel some degree of pressure. In terms of how do you take care of yourself, I think friendships, that's the life raft, really. The creative joys of the work that you're doing, reading, watching films, and then getting excited about what you can take from one filmmaker and put into your own film. And that as a kind of you see the world through the demon eyes of your film, and that just takes over everything. And friendships, that's it for me, at least.
Yeah, for me, it's because I had to stay at home for 2 or 3 days without talking to anyone when I returned back from Rakhine State, because it was a lot of safety situation. And the moment that I landed in Yangon, the airport, I feel like, oh, I'm so safe. I feel so lucky to be in a safe city. But when I was shooting in a Rakhine State, I was so much panic because of something might happen. Someone can get arrested, or it was a lot of pressure and tension. And then whenever I landed in the city where I live, I feel so blessed and how safe I am. Then I feel very, empathy on my character, where they have been through every day of their lives. So it took. For me, it's always took 3 or 4 days. I cannot talk to anyone in a normal time. So when I came back to take care of my the healing time I needed for 3 or 4 days, then I start meeting people who are not filmmaker, who are just something totally different. People that not talking about filming anymore. That's something this really sport. Somehow I do sport dancing is my kind of like passion. So I go for dance and I took dance class. So somehow just to get like this another, chapter of life, just trying to adjust for this two world that we are living. So that's kind of thing that it's really healing. Like, yes, that healing time was really necessary.
We have time for one last question, and I would love for all of you to answer this in some form or fashion, and maybe even think of it as some parting words of advice, maybe that you even want to give some of the audience here who are filmmakers themselves. And the way that I will phrase this is at some point, I have spoken to other filmmakers, and some of us have expressed the sentiment that at some point the film, and I think it was said earlier on this panel, becomes alive, right? Like we start interacting with it in a different way. It starts demanding certain things. It starts asking us to respond to what's happening, to the choices that are happening, whether they be ours or not. So I'm wondering if you could share with the audience here, at some point there might be something unexpected, right? It might completely depart from your original vision. At what point does this film, again, kind of start coming alive and you have to respond to it and kind of steer it and direct it, right? And how do you overcome some of this? How do you work with it? Just curious to hear your thoughts. Yeah, Shaunak.
I think very quickly, for me, I think you become the person who can make the film. And it's not like the film is changing and you remain one calcified, unchanging, stultified being. It's dynamic and both are going through a big morphing. It's tremendous plasticity. And this thing is to just stay punctual to what's happening. And so much of it is just in every way in a film is a function of time in nonfiction, because your life becomes raw material for the film and the film starts illuminating your life in different ways. And I think just staying, punctual and up to date with both changes is what works the best.
Thanks for that. Who'd like to share next? Laura?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for such a great question. I want to ask you to answer it too, maybe at the end. It's really, and it happens, like it becomes this sort of dialectical relationship. You have ideas, but it has ideas, and for me, and it's different. I think I'd answer the question differently for every film, but in this case, for this film, but with Nan, I knew I had to do interviews, and we sat down, and the only was going to be audio. At first, I wasn't sure about that, but I had a good instinct that it would be audio. And we did the first interview, and that's when I knew something else had happened in the process. And it was the way she spoke about her life, and it's the section where she describes being a teenager and meeting her dear friend David Armstrong, who becomes like how she becomes an artist, and this great friendship. And so, but it was in the listening to her and being in the room, and like how I felt, like the emotion that I left from that first interview was like, okay, this is going to go someplace I didn't imagine. I couldn't have imagined, because it moved me so deeply. And so that's, for this film, became the sort of force of how the story unfolded.
Thank you for that. How about you, Snow?
Oh, I think every story has a beginning, middle, and ending. But our people life is no ending at all. Like two of my characters, they continue their life. Also, as Sean said, because we are part of we got a lot of inspire, and we are part of the story. But also, this story became you, and now I'm kind of like part of this process, that like they are in this situation, like Nuno and Hlaing, we live in a conflict region, and also I have that experience coming back to me. So I get this experience the same like my character after nearly finishing the project. But now I'm in another country. I have another chapter to continue my life here. But also they also are facing stay and like trying to to continue their life. So everyone has a story, but our story never ends. There are more stories to make, and there are people who are also a lot of things that we need to talk, and we need to make more story. Yeah.
Thank you. How about you, Sierra?
It is such a great question, and yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone's saying sort of a similar variation on the same thing, which is like letting the film change you, and as you change, allowing that to change the film, and you know, that I know that sounds maybe abstract, but it is difficult as you're living through it. Like I felt like I was both trying to stay true to what brought me to the film in the first place and remind myself what the connection was and what the point was, and also the world changed as I was making the film. I personally grew a lot from watching the footage. I was learning as I was going, and so I think it often felt scary to have to say, wait, I know I wrote something a year ago. It's wrong. I no longer, we need to, I need to move this in a different direction. And knowing whether that is cowardly or brave or the right direction or the wrong direction, you know, but having to take that leap and say, no, the film's something else now. We have to deal with what that means, while also staying true to, you know, trying to remember where you started at the same time. That, yeah, that's what the process felt like to me. Being willing to throw it in the garbage, to stay true to what the film needed to be.
How about you, Simon? Last thoughts?
Again, it feels like I'm kind of repeating what all of the other brilliant minds said. I think in a lot of ways, I'm very conscious that every time I start up a new project, I feel myself like being, you know, visiting another planet where nobody has gone before. And it's all about learning the rules and the ecosystem and the dangers and where to go to get the good food, you know, and behaving, but also being true as to who I am, so that I'm reacting with that world. And when that world reacts, you know, not so pleasantly towards me, kind of try to figure out why that would be. And if it's something that I can do something to alleviate, or if it's just not a story for me. But on the other hand, when it goes really well, it's almost like you're falling in love, and there's a whole, you know, world opening up and getting amazing access, and there's no feeling like it in the world. So I think it's about staying humble, but at the same time also, you know, okay to adapt and make, you know, corrections, but always to be true to your own call.
I think that's a great place to end this. Be true to your own call, right? Don't be, have some humility, right? Other things that I heard was, you know, we take risks of failing, right? But we also learn from it and grow from it, right? In making these films, and hopefully that pushes us into making more films, right?
Exactly.
So on that
PJ,
note, I want
to answer. You have to answer.
Oh, I think it's a lot of that. I mean, honestly, it's a lot of that too. I think a lot of it is, what's interesting is I think sometimes audiences have this idea of like the director be this very controlling, you know, and realistically, it's a lot of navigating a lot of chaos, right? In a lot of ways,
Exactly.
and just kind of holding a lot of grace while you do it, right? And trying to listen to your intuition, but also trying to serve the story and the purpose of what you're doing. But at the same time, right, having to have that confidence to make certain decisions and maybe even walk away from certain things or make certain decisions that, you know, might, you know, be unpopular, right? And again, those are some of the risks we take, right? So I think it's about being open to growth, right? Being open to being humble, right? But also, you know, willing to take that risk of failure, right? And I think anyone in the creative field kind of that's kind of the first step, right? Is you realize you're risking failure and putting yourself out there, right, in the process. And so on that note, I do want to thank all of you for this amazing conversation. I'm very inspired by it. I'm certain everyone else listening has been inspired by it. And if anything, hopefully it encourages someone listening to keep making their film, and see your films as shining examples, right, of what's possible right now. And I wish all of you the best of luck. It's an amazing group of films to be nominated. I hope everyone tunes into the Spirit Awards and further celebrates these films. And I want to end with just thanking Maria and Film Independent for having me moderate this beautiful conversation. And thanks so much, audience, for joining us.
Well, thank you, PJ. It was wonderful conversation, both of you and everyone here. Thank you.
Yeah, really, it was really an honor, and really, I took a lot of notes. So thank you.
It'll be really nice to be in the same room with you all in a few weeks.
Yes.
I was actually thinking, are you guys coming for the 4th? How many of you guys are there? And should we have dinner or something?
That would be great. I'd love that.
Yeah, right. Because I was talking to Shaunak, and we thought it would be really great to get together, as many of us as we could.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
All right, dinner plans. This is how it works.